The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in Ethan's chest like a warning. He stood frozen in the entryway of the Airbnb, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the weight of a long day pressing into his bones. Something about the house, its warmth, its stillness felt too perfect, like a stage set for a scene he hadn't rehearsed. Javier, the host, turned to him with a smile that was almost too bright, his dark eyes catching the golden light spilling through the windows of the coastal Oregon home. "Welcome to Seaside, Ethan," he said, his voice smooth as the waves outside. "You look like you could use a coffee. Or something stronger." Ethan hesitated, his fingers tightening around the strap of his bag. He'd booked this place last minute, desperate to escape the suffocating noise of Portland and his ex's lingering texts. The reviews had glowed. Javier's place is a haven. So welcoming. But standing here, with Javier's gaze lingering a little too long, Ethan felt a prickle of unease. Or was it something else? "Coffee's fine," Ethan said, forcing a smile. He followed Javier into the living room, where a fireplace crackled softly, casting shadows on eclectic decor, a colorful rug, shelves of vintage books, a guitar propped in the corner. The house smelled of cedar and salt air, and the view of the Pacific Ocean through the windows was breathtaking. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched not just by Javier, but by the house itself. Javier handed him a steaming mug, his fingers brushing Ethan's for a split second. "So, what brings you to Seaside?" Javier asked, leaning against the wooden staircase with an ease that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Running from something. Or someone." Ethan's breath caught. He wasn't ready to spill his life story, not about the breakup with Mark, the late-night arguments, or the way Portland had started to feel like a cage. "Just needed a break," he said, sipping the coffee. It was strong, bitter, grounding. "You always this curious about your guests?" Javier laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the room. "Only the interesting ones." He tilted his head, studying Ethan like he was a puzzle to solve. "You've got stories in those eyes. Man, I'm good at reading people." Ethan shifted, his sneakers scuffing the hardwood floor. He wasn't sure if Javier's charm was genuine or practiced, but it was disarming. He set the mug down, glancing at the staircase. "Mind showing me the room?" "Of course." Javier led the way, his steps light, almost playful. The stairs creaked underfoot, and Ethan's heart thudded as he followed. The house was old, its walls lined with faded photographs, families, beach trips, a younger Javier with a wide grin, arm around someone Ethan couldn't quite make out. The guest room was small but inviting, with a quilted bed, a window overlooking the ocean, and a single lavender sprig on the pillow. "This is you," Javier said, leaning against the doorframe. "Make yourself at home. I'm just downstairs if you need anything." His eyes lingered again, and Ethan felt heat creep up his neck. "Thanks," Ethan muttered, dropping his bag. Javier didn't move right away, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm. Then Javier smiled and turned away, leaving Ethan alone with the sound of his own heartbeat. He sank onto the bed, staring at the lavender sprig. It was a small gesture, but it felt deliberate, intimate. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of Javier's presence. He was here to reset, not to get tangled up in whatever this was. But as he unpacked, he found a note tucked into the bedside drawer, written in neat, slanted handwriting. "To the guest who stays, may you find what you're looking for." Ethan's fingers trembled as he held the note. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something told him this house and Javier might force him to figure it out. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The ocean's rhythm was soothing, But every creak of the house made Ethan's eyes snap open. Around midnight, he heard footsteps downstairs, soft, deliberate. He sat up, heart racing, and crept to the door. The hallway was dark, but a faint light glowed from the living room. Against his better judgment, he tiptoed down the stairs. Javier was there, sitting cross-legged on the rug, a candle flickering beside him. He was sketching in a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ethan froze, unsure whether to retreat, but Javier looked up, his expression softening. Couldn't sleep either. Ethan swallowed. Heard something. Thought I'd check. Javier set the notebook aside, revealing a sketch of the ocean, waves curling like secrets. This place gets under your skin, he said. The house, the sea, it makes you think about things you've been avoiding. Ethan's mouth went dry. Like what? Javier's eyes met his, steady and searching. Like why you're really here. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan wanted to brush it off, to laugh and go back to bed. But something in Javier's gaze held him there, pinned like a moth under glass. He didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely, but he couldn't look away. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, painting the room in hues of gold and blue. Ethan sat at the breakfast bar, nursing another cup of Javier's coffee, while Javier hummed softly, flipping pancakes at the stove. The domesticity of it all felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. You didn't have to cook, Ethan said, watching Javier's hands move with practiced ease. Javier glanced over his shoulder, his smile playful. Part of the Airbnb charm. Besides, you looked like you needed something warm in you. Ethan's cheeks flushed, and he focused on his coffee, hoping Javier didn't notice. The night before had left him rattled. The sketch, the conversation, the way Javier seemed to see right through him. He'd barely slept, replaying Javier's words, why you're really here. So, Javier said, sliding a plate of pancakes across the counter. What's the plan today? Beach walk. Exploring the town. Ethan shrugged, cutting into the pancakes. They were perfect fluffy, with a hint of cinnamon. Maybe the beach. Clear my head. Javier sat across from him, his own plate untouched. The beach is good for that. But it also has a way of pulling things out of you. Secrets. Regrets. He trailed off, his eyes flicking to Ethan's. You ever feel like you're carrying something too heavy to name? Ethan's fork paused midair. He wanted to deflect, to change the subject, but Javier's openness was disarming. Yeah, he admitted, voice low. Sometimes. Javier nodded, like he understood more than Ethan was saying. When I first moved here, I was running too. From a lot of things. This house, it saved me. Ethan frowned. Running from what? Javier's smile faded, and for the first time, Ethan saw a crack in his host's easy confidence. Family stuff. Expectations. A version of myself I didn't want to be. He leaned back, his fingers tracing the edge of his mug. I came out late. Didn't go over well back home in Texas. The confession hit Ethan like a wave. He'd suspected, maybe even hoped, but hearing it out loud made his pulse race. That why you're here? To start over? Something like that. Javier's eyes softened. What about you? What's got you so guarded? Ethan's throat tightened. He wasn't ready to talk about Mark, about the way love had turned into control, how he'd lost himself trying to be what Mark wanted. Just needed space, he said, the words feeling hollow. Javier didn't push, but his silence was louder than any question. After breakfast, Ethan escaped to the beach, the cold sand grounding him as he walked along the shore. The ocean stretched endless and gray, its waves whispering questions he wasn't ready to answer. He thought about Javier's story, the weight of coming out, the courage it took to rebuild. Ethan envied that strength. Back at the house, Javier was in the garden, tending to a patch of wildflowers. Ethan watched from the porch, struck by how natural Javier looked. Dirt smudged on his cheek, his hands gentle with the plants. "You garden too?" Ethan called, trying to lighten the mood. Javier grinned, standing and brushing off his hands. "Gotta keep things alive around here. Wanna help?" Against his better judgment, Ethan joined him, kneeling in the dirt. Javier showed him how to prune the flowers, their shoulders brushing as they worked. The closeness felt dangerous, electric, and Ethan's heart pounded every time Javier's hand grazed his. "You're good at this," Javier said, his voice soft. "Got a gentle touch." Ethan laughed nervously. First time for everything. Javier's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Sometimes the first time is the best time. The words lingered, heavy with possibility. Ethan wanted to lean into it, to let himself feel the pull, but fear held him back. Mark's voice echoed in his mind, "You read too much. Ethan. Too needy." He stood abruptly, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I should clean up." Javier's expression faltered, but he nodded. "Sure. Dinner's at 7 if you're up for it." Ethan retreated to his room, his thoughts a tangle of desire and doubt. He didn't trust himself, not with Javier, not with the way this house seemed to peel back his defenses. But as he stood under the shower, letting the water wash away the day, he couldn't stop picturing Javier's smile, the warmth of his voice, the way his presence felt like a promise. Dinner was a quiet affair, the table set with candles and a simple meal of roasted vegetables and grilled fish. Javier had changed into a soft blue sweater that made his eyes glow, and Ethan couldn't stop stealing glances. The tension from the garden lingered, unspoken but palpable. "You're quiet tonight," Javier said, pouring wine into Ethan's glass. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded, though his mind was a storm. "Just thinking about." Javier's tone was gentle, but there was an edge of curiosity that made Ethan's skin prickle. He took a sip of wine, stalling. "This place. You. It's a lot." Javier raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "A lot good. Or a lot bad?" Ethan laughed, the sound tight. "I don't know yet." They ate in silence for a while, the clink of forks and the distant crash of waves filling the space. Ethan wanted to ask about Javier's life, about the person in the old photos, about what made him stay in this quiet town. But every question felt like stepping into deeper water. After dinner, Javier suggested a walk to the pier. The night was crisp, the air sharp with salt and pine. They walked side by side, their footsteps sinking on the wooden boards. The pier was lit with string lights, and a few locals lingered, fishing or chatting. Ethan felt exposed, like everyone could see the confusion written on his face. "You ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" Ethan asked suddenly, surprising himself. Javier stopped, leaning against the railing. The ocean churned below, dark and restless. "All the time. Before I came here. Back in Texas, I was trying to be someone I wasn't. For my family. For my church. It was like suffocating." Ethan's chest ached. He knew that feeling, trying to fit into a mold that didn't match who he was. "How'd you get past it?" Javier turned to him, his expression raw. "I stopped pretending. Decided I'd rather be alone than live a lie." The words hit Ethan hard, cracking something open inside him. He thought of Mark, of the years spent shrinking himself to fit someone else's expectations. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Javier stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "You start small. One truth at a time." Ethan's heart pounded. He wanted to tell Javier everything about Mark, about the fear that kept him guarded, about the way Javier's presence made him feel alive for the first time in months. But before he could speak, Javier's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. Javier glanced at the screen, his face tightening. "Sorry, I need to take this." He stepped away, his voice low as he spoke into the phone. Ethan caught fragments. "Not now. I told you. It's over." And his stomach twisted. Was there someone else? When Javier returned, his smile was strained. "Old business," he said, waving it off. "Nothing to worry about." But Ethan was worried. The call, the secret site reminded him of Mark's late-night texts, the lies that unraveled their relationship. He pulled back, his walls going up. "I should head back," he said, turning toward the house. Javier didn't argue, but his silence felt heavy as they walked. Back at the house, Ethan retreated to his room, the note from the drawer still tucked in his pocket. "May you find what you're looking for." He wasn't sure what that was, but he knew it was tied to Javier, and that scared him more than anything. The next day, Ethan woke to the smell of rain and the sound of Javier moving downstairs. He stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle his feelings. Javier's openness, his warmth, was pulling Ethan in, but the phone call from the night before lingered like a shadow. He found Javier in the living room, sorting through a box of old records. "Morning," Javier said, his smile softer than usual. "Thought we could listen to something today. Rainy days are good for music." Ethan nodded, sitting on the couch as Javier slid a vinyl onto the turntable. The soulful voice of Etta James filled the room, and Ethan felt his guard soften. "You've got a thing for old stuff, huh?" he said, gesturing to the records and vintage decor. Javier laughed, sitting beside him. "Reminds me of my mom. She loved this music. Used to dance around the kitchen when I was a kid." Ethan smiled, picturing a young Javier, carefree and happy. "You miss her?" Javier's expression clouded. "Yeah. But we don't talk much. Not since I came out." Ethan's heart sank. He wanted to reach out, to say something comforting, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he asked, "What was it like? Coming out, I mean." Javier leaned back, his eyes distant. "Like jumping off a cliff. You're free, but you're terrified of where you'll land. My family, they didn't get it. My dad said I was throwing my life away. My mom just cried." Ethan swallowed, his own memories surfacing. "I told my parents when I was 16. They didn't kick me out, but it was like I stopped being their son. Just a problem they didn't know how to fix." Javier's hand rested on the couch, inches from Ethan's. "That's rough. But you're here now. That's something." Ethan met his gaze, the air between them thick with unspoken words. He wanted to close the distance, to let himself feel what was building, but fear held him back. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to start over," he said quietly. Javier's fingers brushed his, tentative but warm. "You don't have to do it alone." The moment stretched, fragile and electric, until the doorbell rang, shattering it. Javier pulled back, his jaw tight as he went to answer. Ethan heard a man's voice, sharp and demanding. "We need to talk, Javi." Ethan's stomach dropped. He stayed on the couch, straining to listen. The conversation was muffled, but the tone was heated. When Javier returned, his face was unreadable. Sorry about that. Just someone from my past. Who? Ethan asked, unable to stop himself. Javier hesitated. An ex. He's persistent. The word ex hit Ethan like a punch. He wanted to ask more, but Javier's closed-off expression stopped him. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small talk and avoided glances. Ethan felt the distance growing, and it hurt more than he expected. That night, he lay awake, the rain tapping against the window. He thought about Javier's hand on his, the way his heart had raced. He wanted to trust this feeling, but the shadow of Javier's examined his own past loomed large. By the fifth day, Ethan was restless. The house felt too small, Javier's presence too big. They'd fallen into a rhythm coffee in the morning, walks on the beach, quiet evenings with music or books, but the undercurrent of tension was undeniable. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a spark waiting to ignite. Ethan decided to explore the town, hoping distance would clear his head. Seaside was charming, with its quaint shops and bustling boardwalk, but his thoughts kept drifting to Javier. He stopped at a bookstore, picking up a novel about second chances, and wondered if he was ready for one. When he returned, Javier was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a focus that seemed forced. Have fun? Javier asked, not looking up. Yeah, Ethan said, setting the book on the counter. Found something to read. Javier glanced at the book, his lips twitching. Second chances. Huh. Good choice. Ethan's heart skipped. You think so? Javier set the knife down, his eyes locking on Ethan's. I think everyone deserves one. Even you. The words were a lifeline, but Ethan hesitated. What about you? That ex, is he your second chance? Javier's face darkened. No. That's done. He didn't want me. Not really. Just the idea of me. Ethan understood that too well. My ex was like that. Wanted me to be someone I'm not. Javier stepped closer, his voice low. And who are you? Ethan. The question hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Ethan's breath hitched. I'm trying to figure that out. Javier's hand reached out, cupping Ethan's cheek. The touch was gentle, but it set Ethan's nerves on fire. You're enough, Javier whispered. Just as you are. Ethan's resolve crumbled. He leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft at first, then desperate, years of longing and fear pouring out. When they pulled apart, Ethan's hands were trembling, but he felt alive. Seen. I didn't expect this, Ethan said, his voice shaky. Javier smiled, his thumb brushing Ethan's cheek. Neither did I. But the moment was fleeting. The doorbell rang again, and Javier's face fell. Stay here, he said, heading to the door. Ethan heard the same voice from before, louder now, angrier. You can't just shut me out, Javi. Ethan's heart sank. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to lose this, whatever it was. The confrontation spilled into the living room, and Ethan couldn't stay away. He stepped into the doorway, seeing Javier face to face with a man tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw and a glare that could cut glass. This was the ex, and his presence filled the room with a suffocating energy. Ethan, go upstairs, Javier said, his voice tight. But Ethan didn't move. What's going on? The man Carlos, Ethan later learned, turned to him, his eyes narrowing. Who's this? Your new fling. Leave him out of this. Javier snapped, stepping between them. This is between us. Carlos. Carlos laughed, bitter and cold. You think you can just move on? After everything. Ethan's stomach churned. He wanted to run, to hide from this mess, but his feet were rooted to the floor. Javier's shoulders were tense. His hands clenched. I told you. We're done, Javier said. You made that clear when you left. Carlos stepped closer, his voice dropping. I made a mistake. Okay. I want you back. Ethan's heart stopped. He looked at Javier, searching for a sign, a hint of what he was feeling. But Javier's face was a mask. His eyes locked on Carlos. You don't get to do this, Javier said, his voice breaking. You don't get to show up and unravel everything I've built. Carlos reached for him, but Javier stepped back, bumping into Ethan. The contact jolted Ethan, grounding him. He grabbed Javier's arm, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. You don't owe him anything. Javier turned, his eyes wide with surprise and something else, gratitude. Maybe. Carlos's face twisted, but before he could speak, Javier took Ethan's hand. You're right, he said, his voice firm. I don't. Carlos stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Javier's hand was still in Ethan's, warm and steady. I'm sorry you saw that, Javier said, his voice raw. Ethan shook his head. I'm not. They stood there, hands clasped, the weight of the moment settling around them. Ethan felt the walls he'd built start to crumble, replaced by a fragile hope. He didn't know where this was going, but for the first time, he wanted to find out. The final day in Seaside dawned bright, the sky clear and endless. Ethan and Javier sat on the beach, sharing a blanket, the waves lapping at their feet. The air was cool, but Javier's presence was warm, grounding. I'm leaving tomorrow, Ethan said, his voice heavy with the words he didn't want to say. Javier nodded, his eyes on the horizon. I know. But you don't have to leave everything behind. Ethan turned to him, his heart racing. What do you mean? Javier took his hand, his thumb tracing circles on Ethan's palm. I mean, stay? Or come back? This, he gestured between them. It's real. I feel it. And I think you do too. Ethan's breath caught. He thought of Portland, of the life he'd been running from, of the fear that had kept him small. And then he thought of Javier, the way he laughed, the way he saw Ethan, the way he made him want to be brave. I'm scared, Ethan admitted, his voice barely audible over the waves. Javier smiled, soft and sure. Me too. But the best things are worth being scared for. Ethan leaned in, kissing Javier with a certainty he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was a start, a second chance. When Ethan packed his bag the next morning, he found the note from the drawer again. May you find what you're looking for. He smiled, tucking it into his pocket. He hadn't found all the answers, but he'd found something better, himself, and someone who saw him for who he was. As he stepped outside, Javier was waiting, leaning against the porch railing. You'll come back? Javier asked, his voice hopeful. Ethan grinned, his heart light. Yeah, I will. The door clicked shut behind him, but this time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a beginning.